Thank you for joining us for a webinar today, and a Happy New Year if we haven't already wished you one. Even if we have, it's still a Happy New Year to you. We're glad that you've joined us for this Crisis Coach webinar. This is part of the webinars that are sponsored by the New Jersey MEP, and we're pleased to have them as a sponsor going into 2015. We invite you to please become our friend. Firestorm Solutions on Facebook, and if you're into Twitter, you can follow us, Firestorm Soul on Twitter. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communication, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Please keep in mind that this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and the work product provided must be read and considered in conjunction with your organization's personal counsel. And the information given should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. Firestorm is very pleased to have the New Jersey MEP as our host, co-sponsor, and underwriter of this Crisis Coach webinar series. Today we're going to be discussing building an intelligence network. This is part one of a three webinar series that will go on for the next 2 months. You can register for these by visiting firestorm.com. You can also register, and not only register, but watch past webinars in the Crisis Coach webinar series. Our presenter today is going to be Jim Satterfield, the president of Firestorm. The moderators today are our good friend Joe Caratanudo of the New Jersey MEP and Blair Neville, who is a principal located in New Jersey with Firestorm. Joe and Blair, over to you, please.
Okay, I guess I'll start it off. This is Joe Caratanudo from the New Jersey Manufacturing Extension Program. For those of you who are not familiar with us, New Jersey MEP is focused on helping assist manufacturers in the state to become more productive, more efficient, and more globally competitive. And we do that through a host of different services that we provide and assist the companies with helping with energy costs, helping companies take advantage of R&D tax credits. We also get involved in process improvement with things like lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, also assisting companies in gaining ISO certification, as well as the commercial side of the business, where we help companies with things like strategic planning, business development, marketing, innovation, and of course, business continuity planning, which brings us to Firestorm and to Blair. So Blair?
Great, Joe. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I just want to reiterate a Happy New Year to everyone who's on our first webinar of this series, and thank Joe and NJMEP for their support in helping us get this message out to people who are on the line. And again, just to reiterate what Joe was saying, and that the MEP is focused on manufacturing, but this message is a little broader than just that. So if we have some non-manufacturers on the line, not to worry. The information will be helpful, and you'll get some benefit, even though it's sponsored. And as I say, thanks again for taking the time to help us with this, Joe. And I'll turn it back to Jim.
Well, thank you both, Joe and Blair and Bill, for opening up today and putting it together. We have enjoyed the webinar series over the last couple of years with the New Jersey MEP and all the sessions that we'll be doing this year as we share. My name is Jim Satterfield. I'm president and founder of Firestorm, and we hope every day in the webinars to be able to give you some insights into what's going on. I think one of the objectives that we all have is to understand what's happening in the world, and one of the biggest challenges that we all face is change. We've certainly seen a great many things that are occurring and are happening now. The events from Paris last week with the shooting and the terrorist attacks, the whole idea of violence in the workplace that can come from a variety of different areas, those types of external threats. And to see the idea of a homegrown terrorist occurring here in the U.S. is certainly something to be a consideration for. Also, I think on everyone's radar screen right now is the flu season that we're in. If I were to tell you that over 30 children died in America as a result of Ebola, you would probably have a startling reaction, like I didn't hear that. That's what do you mean? That's in Africa. It's not here in the U.S. We've had over 30 children die in America from the seasonal flu. It's something that we discount because it's common and we are associated with it, but it's now at significant levels in every state in the union. As you think about it, it has the potential to move through your workforce, and you'd have absenteeism rates of 10, 20, or 30% conceivably at this point in time. The vaccine this year was only about 1/3 effective, a little bit below what we traditionally see. So there are exposures in areas for us to think about. And I think this webinar series is designed to help us think about what some of the changes are for the world that we live in and come together. We won't be able to get to everyone's question live today, but if they're on the toolbar to the right, if you have questions, please type them in, and we'll try to get to some of those at the end. And if not, we're going to try to reach out to everyone on today's broadcast to make sure that we've answered your questions as we move forward. So can you identify your organization's next crisis? You've taken the time today to be with us in this webinar, and so you were probably thinking about something in your business, thinking about some exposure that you could have. And clearly we've spent a lot of time in this webinar series dealing with some of the big weather events that we've seen in the past, Hurricane Sandy and the impacts that it had on all businesses in the state of New Jersey. But as you can see, some of these other words could certainly impact you and your business. Defective products, fraud, lawsuits, violence, competition, supply chain failure. Those are other exposures that are involved. And one of the things that I think that we can help you with is seeing what your organization's next crisis is. And that's kind of as an underscore in this webinar series. And the way we do that is through a predict, plan, perform process. And we would encourage you to think the same way about your business. And so as you think this morning, as we go through the webinar, what are the vulnerabilities that you're facing? What are those impacts going to be within your company? How do you monitor them? What are the triggers that would activate your plans? And through the webinar series, we'll share with you a lot of things that you would want to think about to include in your plans. Before we started this webinar this morning, Joe and Blair were talking about a manufacturer in New Jersey that they're currently working with and helping with the plans that they have. And then finally, under the perform, is the training of your people, the testing of your plans, the having the right emergency supplies in place. We've seen that all too often, that there are things that you need that you don't have in place. And all of these combined together are lead toward building a comprehensive program within your organization. So as we think about this, I'd like you to stop for a moment and think about who's really responsible in your organization. Who's responsible for managing the risk in the areas that are out there? And clearly it's the responsibility of management. Depending upon how your company's structured, and if there is a board, whether you're a public company or a private company, there's a governance fiduciary responsibility going to the board level, but senior management really has the responsibility for preparing for these risks. Unfortunately, we regularly see that management is dealing with them just as they are occurring or just after they've occurred, not dealing with them before. And so today, when we talk about creating an intelligence network and looking at what's going on, that area of predict becomes extremely important. That's an area where we're expanding where you're looking for. And the goal here is to be able to identify the impending risk before they occur. So as you listen to the discussion today, I'd like you to think about that and think about in your organization, for those risks that you've identified, how will you know that they're about to occur before they're there? If we don't do that and eliminate those, they're going to have a disproportional impact on your organization. It's your people, it's your brand, it's your reputation, and the ability to survive that makes a big difference. We've seen many stories throughout the course of the year And as the year was ending and we saw the data breach at Sony and their confidential information went out over the internet and sharing with others, there are disproportional impacts for these types of risk and threats as they're out there. So can you really predict a crisis? And the answer is immediately yes, of course we can. We just need to understand what the warning signs are, and I think a differentiation here, as you've thought about those risks, I'd like you to take a step back and think about what's a warning sign that could tell me that that's about to occur? What's a warning sign that would lead me to look at that particular area? And when we go through, we've seen that lots of times after a crisis, people will come forward, well, you know, I saw that. I was concerned about that person. You've got employees in your organization, and we're going to talk a little later about behaviors of concern, but that could be a warning sign that would tell you that you needed to take a look at it. Someone who maybe didn't get a promotion within your organization, or someone that has problems at home or a substance problem that could come into the workplace. Domestic abuse, we're seeing that move more into the workplace as we're carrying forward. And so we can also look at indicators for other types of risk and exposures, and the key is going to be identifying these indicators pre-crisis to be able to manage those aspects. Our research has shown us that there are patterns that these indicators repeat over and over again. And those patterns then tell us how often it's going to happen and how bad. That's the frequency and severity associated with it. You can think about insurance companies and planning in those types of areas. And many of you are carrying business interruption insurance in your organization today, or you're carrying other types of coverages that could be appropriate at that point in time. So we're going to focus on indicators and warning signs as we're moving forward. And indicators are clue cues. Now that's a tongue twister for me, and I've just barely had a couple of cups of coffee this morning, and so it's hard to say clue cues in those areas. But it's information that's coming to you about an emerging event, about something. And it could be behavioral, that employee who's acting up, or a problem or a concern in it. It could be about transactions that are occurring. It could be about the processes that you have in there. And it could be both verbal and nonverbal within that perspective that comes forward. We're going to start to frame some things in this webinar series, and today we're going to lay that foundation about creating an intelligence network so that you can start to understand what's happening before these events occur and have an intervention to mitigate, or in some cases actually prevent, the occurrence from coming together and carrying forward. So you start by making sure that everyone is aware. Everyone within your organization is aware of what's happening, of warning signs, aware of behaviors of concern, and particularly thinking about that, and in particularly aware if there's ever been any threats or statements of intent to cause harm. That's never a joke. It's never an issue that you can immediately discount, but it's something that you need to be aware of in coming in. We're going to talk about other ways to be aware than observing a behavior, but it's ultimately talking about that we're going to be focused on. So you're going to have to do training. Sit down and talk with the supervisors in your plant. Talk with management who, as they start to see some changes that come about. Maybe you've had an employee who has always been on time who now starts to be a little late. Someone who maybe becomes argumentative or overreacts in a particular situation. And those things could be telling us that there's a path to violence that could come in. So we want to be able to deal with those that are exhibiting this behavior before there's an event that occurs. This certainly warrants an intervention that would come on. So how do you know what you don't know? Well, the answer to that is you've got to create an intelligence network. And there are going to be many elements associated in that intelligence network. And it's not just about violence that we're looking for. Looking at critical customers. Do you have a major customer? If you were to lose that customer, what's the impact on your business? If you were to lose a critical supplier to you, what's the impact on your business? What are they doing at this point in time? If you have an intelligence network, You can become aware of that by looking at the warning signs and the indicators before it escalates to that level of time. So our goals are to know today what will happen tomorrow. If you knew that something was going to happen tomorrow, you could take steps today to mitigate that. Now, the beauty of the hurricane, and when we think about Sandy and what occurred, we could track that storm. You knew days in advance that it was coming into that direction. There are other times that we don't know days in advance. A tornado could occur. Well, you're going to get, at a minimum, only a very short amount of time to know that that's about to happen. So intervening early on and following those cues will make a difference. But similarly, there are threats that can happen within your organization. Our second goal is to make sure that we're following this predict, plan, perform process. You're going to have to predict, if you see this, what's going to occur next, and that will guide you to your plan. And so having that identified, doing the monitoring, and then having particular triggers that would activate your plans would make a difference. So we're looking then to really transform the uncertainty that you're faced with every day in your business into certainty. And we're going to establish some metrics to see how well we're doing and to maintain it. And so you really want to know the what, the when, the where, and what the pattern is that's associated with that, because that many times the pattern will be the indicator to us that these areas are going through. Now, the process that we go through to do this is that we listen and look. And so to know, you must listen and look. And we're going to give you just one area in passing to have you think about, and that's on social media. There's an opportunity to see in many of the cases that this information is being discussed on social media. We were working with an organization, and they found that they had one of their people on the roof drinking a beer during the day, and he posted a picture of himself up on social media. That was happening in your location. Would you have wanted to know about that? Or in another, in working with another company, there was an employee who was having a problem with his supervisor and was sharing that confusion. By the way, that employee made 50 posts during one 8-hour shift. Hard to imagine you'd have enough time to be able to do that. And this was a racial problem between the employee and the supervisor. And the employee was stating that the only way that he could see resolving it was bringing a gun to work tomorrow. Well, if that was your company, would you want to know that an employee felt the only way they could resolve a problem was to bring a gun to work, and in particular, that they were bringing a gun to work tomorrow? So that's an important element to look at and to think about and to know. So listening and looking, what do those words mean? Those are different words that you would normally use in your company to talk about things. So listening is creating a conversation, a conversion aggregator, getting all these things that are out there. There's a lot of information out there. If you think about all the events that have happened just in France recently, or what you've seen, there's a deluge of information that's there. We want to convert that information into intelligence, something that you can use to make a decision about your business to understand what's going on. So we want to be able to identify what's being communicated about your company or about your people. It would be nice to be able to put up a geo-fence around your building to be able to understand everything that's being said there, or around what your customers are saying about your company at this point in time. Another intelligence tool that would come in. And so to do that, we look at streams. Streams are made up of phrases. Phrases are made up of words, so that you can see those areas, and it creates a general awareness of what's going on within your company. That general awareness is listening. And so you want to see when those things are happening. Looking is then when we take that general information and go back and look at a person of interest, a particular individual, and what they're doing there. It could be around an identified risk or crisis or threat or an exposure or a person, and we can do that to look at who else they're interacting with. What is their sphere of influence and where they share that information. So looking is more targeted awareness. So those are the two areas that we're going to talk about more in the coming webinar series, to share with you how you can simply do this within your company to know that's what's going on, both inside the company and in the community, with your suppliers and with your customers, to better understand what's occurring. Now, predictive intelligence is really what we're talking about in creating that. And it's one of the, communications is one of the most perishable aspects of it. So if somebody has said something 3 months ago, it's not going to have the same impact as somebody who's saying it right now. And when we think about predictive intelligence, we divide it into two areas, hard and soft data. Hard data is an email. It's a posting on social media. Soft data is more that what you're seeing, what's your intuition, how do you interpret that behavior. You've been doing that your entire business career. You just weren't calling it soft data. You know if something's not right with that person. They're not quite doing what you've seen them historically do. So I would encourage you to continue to do the good things that that you've been doing. But I think that there's another element of information that's out there to know. You'd be amazed at what people are posting today on social media and how that has a direct operational impact into your organization. So technology can aid in that area. And we're talking about this. It's more than a Google search, and in another discussion we'll show you a little bit more under the covers and how it works together. But regardless of where the information comes from any of these sources, you need to have a central repository. We see information getting siloed within organizations. Maybe the foreman on the shop floor knows something, but somebody else is not aware of that. Or similarly, maybe someone observed something and they haven't communicated it here. Information gets siloed, and you need to be able to communicate that across the entire organization as it comes together. So if we're going to talk about creating an intelligence network, what are the components that go into that? And there's four. There are four that you can easily do, and some of this you're already doing. First are background checks. If someone's been a problem in the past, they're probably going to continue to be a problem. Let's find that out and check and screen that. And we can do another webinar on what you need to think about in terms of background checks, because there are clearly areas that are traps that you can fall into if you haven't done them. If you do a national background check, that's going to tell you about felonies, but it won't tell you about misdemeanors. And that may not sound like much, but if someone had been arrested for a felony and plea bargained it down to a misdemeanor, would you have wanted to know? The answer is yes. So it's a different way of looking at background checks to get that information, or you would have missed it in those areas. Anonymous reporting. We hear a lot about see something, say something, and generally that has failed universally everywhere. Repeatedly, people have seen things and no one has come forward to share that. That's creating a culture within your organization that it's okay to share that information, and in another webinar we'll talk more about that. Today we're going to really zero in on behavioral risk threat assessment. That's why it's bolded and a little bit brighter, and we'll talk about some of the elements that you can put into place right now to deal with that within your organization. And the last part of this is social media monitoring. What's being said today on Facebook and on Twitter, on Instagram, and being posted has application within your business. Most of us that are running companies and organizations have a little gray hair. Unfortunately, I have lots of gray hair, and I don't live my life on social media, but your workforce does. Those comments that are out there, if you had a posting and knew that one of your employees was going through a particularly bitter divorce and there was domestic violence involved, they know where that spouse is. If they work for you, that at the start or the end of shift, that's a particular exposure opportunity. If you have that knowledge, you can make a difference. If you look inside the orange box that's here, it says crisis. It's a risk event for which no one has identified the vulnerabilities and exposures and has not developed a plan and therefore does not know how to respond. That's what a crisis is. If you don't have a plan, if you're not looking, if you're not monitoring, then you can find yourself in a crisis. And a crisis is not business as usual, it's business as unusual. You don't have all the information, you don't have all the controls that you would normally have, and it's going to be hard to have an outcome that you want. So we want to get involved in this earlier in the process to carry forward. So when we think about behaviors of concern, and you've been running your companies for a long time, hey, if it was a minor event, you know what, you're going to handle that just as you normally would. You've got a discipline program, you'll carry forward with it without any confusion. If it was a significant threat, a gun coming to work, you can call 911 and get the police involved, and you know how to handle those very effectively. But it's in that middle area, that medium area, where it's a behavior of concern. What is it that you need to do? So what do you do, and when do you do it? So if it's yes, Blair.
Jim, this is Blair. I just want to make a quick comment, and it's something that Joe and I have been out to a fair number of customers here, and one thing that's constant through a lot of our interviews and assessments that we do, there's a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge in all of the companies we've visited. Whether it's just actual production knowledge, they know how to run the business, and or knowledge of what's going on in the business. I want to just make a comment on that anonymous reporting, and again, we can talk about it a little later, and I know we do have some webinars specifically on that. But getting your employees and having them be able to share that knowledge with management, with their managers, with their supervisors, and being able to do it comfortably and confidently that it will be respected is a really important feature. And it amazes me how much information people have, and if they have the ability to do it anonymously, do it comfortably, have a mechanism and tool to be able to share it so that it gets translated properly, it's a tremendous amount of information that I think gets lost a lot of times because some companies don't have that.
And Blair, thanks for jumping in. I appreciate that, and I think you're on target. If you think about if we were running some equipment, we have guards on the piece of equipment so your hand doesn't get stuck in a particular area or doesn't get hurt. It's a preventative area. Think about anonymous reporting as a guard for your business. It's going to keep that problem from happening and occurring because someone comes forward. We actually have hard statistics, which is an interesting thing, and we talked about metrics on a slide a little bit earlier. If you go into the area of violence, and we go particularly, let's just take schools as an example, that it's been shown in all of those episodes where the gun came to school and there was an active shooter, there were over 67% of the time someone else knew. Over 67% of the time someone else knew. That's a great statistic to know. If something's going on in your company, somebody knows, and if you don't know about it, you don't have an intelligence network and you're in the dark. You have to understand. So what we want you to take away from this slide that's up right now is those low-level things, handle that as you always have your normal discipline. The high-level areas where it's at a point of violence, you're going to pick up the phone and call 911. We want you to intervene over there on that thermometer down at the behavior of concern, not when it goes to threats, not when it goes to physical injury or ultimately death. If it's at those top three levels, we're losing, and we want to be able to interact earlier in the process. So we're going to focus on the behaviors of concern and having the warning signs and the indicators, and in a few minutes we're going to talk about those at three different levels: guarded, elevated, and severe. Obviously you take different actions depending upon what the level is within that, and we'll give you some more information around it, and it will go right into your intelligence network. So if we're going to be creating a program to do this, you need a framework. You need to establish a structure to be able to identify, to assess, is this really going to be a problem, to manage it, to monitor these areas of focusing around the behaviors of concern. So establishing this framework, just as Blair shared that he and Joe have been helping some companies do this, this is an opportunity for you to think about, I know how to run my business, we follow ISO standards, we're Six Sigma, we're lean manufacturing, we do good quality work. One of the things I want to share with you is Blair will be coming out very shortly with a paper on the new ISO quality standards, the fact that risk is now included in that. So I think that explains a great deal about why we're doing this program with the New Jersey MEP, because risk and quality are now together from an ISO standpoint. So if you've been quality certified, you now need to know that this is what we're talking about, and having an intelligence network is a portion of doing that. So a behavioral risk threat assessment program is made up of four elements: awareness, reporting, central repository or vortex of bringing that information together, and then a plan. Now, awareness is making sure that everybody is understands it, can see and carry forward on it. The reporting, as Blair just jumped in and talked a little bit about the anonymous reporting and how important. The central repository is the idea that information doesn't get siloed. If somebody in your company knows, we want you to know, because that's the only way we can do it. And then the plan, and by the way, that acronym there, BERTHA, is made up of the BE out of behavioral, the R out of risk, the TH out of threat, and the A out of assessment. The BERTHA plan allows you to do that to conduct investigations, because sometimes you're going to need to do an investigation. A screening, does that behavior rise to a level we need to do something? An action plan, what are we going to do about it now that we've seen it? Continuing to monitor, is it getting better or is it getting worse? And then having a sign-off on that everybody's in agreement, and then keeping the records and maintaining it. This is a time when we need to be more aware, because we're at higher risk than ever before. OSHA has identified workplace violence as a known hazard in the workplace, and you need to have a plan to deal with it. There are over 2 million episodes of workplace violence annually in the United States. That's the reason why we're taking your time to talk about it today. So when you think about this behavioral risk threat assessment program and the various steps that are involved in it, you see we have to have a way that we're going to do the investigation. Do you have forms and procedures? And it's going to be critical that you do it the same way every time, or you're opening yourself up to liability. You've got to touch every base and do it the same way so that we're being uniform. You've got to train people to know how to do it, and as you go through doing that, it will make a difference. You might want to even involve your legal counsel in some areas to establish privilege. If you're going to have a behavioral assessment team, you want at least 3 people on that. You want somebody that comes out of your HR side, somebody else that is either in management or security or operational areas, and then someone from a senior management level. You could have as many as 5 people on your behavioral set assessment team. 3 is an optimum number, so 3 or 4 or 5 will work. You need a screening too. How do you, now we've seen this, how do we know if it's good or bad? Interestingly, the FBI and the Secret Service have some protocols that you can download for free. By the way, that's a pretty good price. I like those. And go through, but the training on how to do that becomes important. Or there are other things, Waiver 21, Mosaic, K-Wood, a variety of those other tools, and we can share it with you on those others. But at the conclusion of doing the screening, you have to then have a corrective action with that employee in place. So as you look at these things in the plan, it's the investigation, it's the behavior risk screening, the action plan, the monitoring, and then a sign-off. And everybody on the threat assessment team would be signing on that together. So it's just not one person's opinion. In looking at the area that is the most difficult is the actual behavioral risk screening area. And that's where we talked about it. It's that medium area. The low level, you're handling it with your discipline. The high level, you're calling 911. It's this median area that really requires the time to sit down and learn and how to do it. And we divide that into 3 distinct groups. Guarded is the lowest level, just above what you would normally do from a discipline standpoint. Elevated is that mid-target area within it. And severe, those are the ones that we are concerned about. If we don't do something quickly, it could easily go up to the violence that we're talking about. Now let's go into those in just a little bit more detail to give you that area. So as you're screening this behavior of concern that you've got to, with the guarded level, even if it requires some supervision, you probably need to sit down and have an intervention with that employee and talk with them about what they're doing and going from those areas, and explaining to them what prompted that to carry forward, and then have a follow-up point that you're going to come back and deal with them. If it's more severe than that, if it's a little bit more aggressive associated with it in your screening and it's at an elevated level, then you're going to have more supervision. You're going to be more involved with this particular one, and there's going to be a much more formal intervention regarding what you're going to do and when you're going to follow up. If it's at the extreme level, that severe level, then you may have to have this person removed from the workforce. You're going to have to suspend them for a period of time. You're going to have them cleared before they would come back. And those are going to be the ones that are more aggressive. And so that's why you want to go through a detailed process. You want a written action plan and a set of requirements before they're safe to return to work. Maybe they're seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist. You may need to deal with some outside source to be able to come back, because once you're into this category, moving all the way over to the violent act is fairly instantaneous thereafter. So taking these median area, we had the low, medium, and high, focusing in on the medium and then dividing it into guarded, elevated, and severe, help guide you through that process, and we can show you how those things can be accomplished. Now, as we talked about earlier, warning signs, and I would like you to gear that over to a little bit of what are the triggers. When Blair was gracious enough to point out about the anonymous reporting and how that can make a difference, and we've said that over 2/3 of the time someone else knew within the organization. Well, threats are certainly a major warning sign. If someone makes a threat, even a minor threat, you know, I just want to get this thing handled, or a conditional threat, if this doesn't happen, I'm going to do that. But the ones that we're most concerned about are the direct threats. I'm going to do this to this person at this time. As those rise, now you're seeing a different level of concern, but any threat would be a warning sign in your intelligence network, and if you became aware of it, whether it was through the monitoring of social media or someone observing it or an anonymous report coming in, you have to take. Verbal behavior is another big trigger and indication here. The type of language that's used. Is it abusive? Do you have an area in your workforce that could create a hostile work environment? Those verbal comments become extremely important to look at. Any written behavior. And what we're seeing today is this information is being written in social media, posted on social media about your company today. And that will be a primary source of information in creating your intelligence network. The good news is this can be done inexpensively, but you would have that information at your fingertips and as a part of the investigation area as you carry forward. Clearly, if it becomes physical, if there's violence associated with this, we now are in a situation that we just can't ignore it. There is no level of violence that's acceptable in the workplace within your company. Sexual, we see sexual molestation and sexual abuse happening in many workforces today, and that's an area that will change and become a particular direction. This has specific liabilities under your employee practice liability insurance and what programs that you need to have in place. Domestic violence, as we said early in the webinar today, is coming directly into the workplace. And sometimes we learn about that from a posting where an employee has shared with another employee that there was a problem. Whether it's male or female, this is an issue and it is a factor, and we're seeing those elements that are coming in. Suicide, almost always when there's a suicide, we're seeing that there is a kill list associated with it. The person that wants to have death by cop, the person that wants to get even with those individuals. Just last week there was a series of events in Idaho where an individual went after some people in their family, some other people that had done them wrong in the workplace, and 6 people were dead as a result of that. It was a suicide process, but there was violence that was carried out within it. So these are triggers. You need to be able to recognize them, but if you don't have an intelligence network, that information will go undetected. Now, the last part of it that we talked about was having an action plan. An action plan is how you're going to deal with this person's behavior of concern. And we're going to implement that until they're no longer a danger to themselves or others. You've got to disseminate it to the people that are concerned and involved with it. What about the person that's supervising this person, the other interactions that were there, and those that have a legitimate interest within it? Now, up to this point, we've been in this webinar today telling you a lot about what you have to do. But the difference in what we need to focus on is not only what you have to do, it's how you need to do it. So the level of detail of planning needs to be much more specific. So I clicked really quickly a partial list out of a report, investigation, and categorization is one of the steps that were done. And you'll see how the level of detail has to start to come together. This is what you need to have within your organization, and it's the ability to check it off, as you see on the left-hand side, and identifying who's responsible within the organization. Now, this is just a sample and a partial list, but if you look at, you receive a report of an incident or behavior of concern, the first thing you want to do in that step 102 is, if this is a dangerous statement, we're going to notify security. We're going to call the police. We're going to intervene immediately at that level. If there's a perceived of insurance, some sense of urgency here, we want to make sure that this person's under constant supervision. We don't want to let them slip out of our view and area. Complete an incident form, and that's where we need to have a standard thing. We need to look at how we do report the incident, how we document it, how we do the investigation and carrying forward. Then we gather the information that we need to. We would interview this person. We might interview the supervisor, the coworkers, and the others that are involved in developing all of the levels of detail there. Now you're seeing how you do it. This is a partial list. We can go into more detail at another time. So what are the next steps? I would ask you, do you want to know what will happen tomorrow? If you do, then you need to have an intelligence network. If you don't want to know, I would ask you, can you afford not to know? How many times have we seen repeatedly someone said, you know, I never really felt comfortable. I was concerned about that. I could see this change that took place. Those are all the things that we want to focus on. So I would encourage you to contact Firestorm to learn how to align your plans to standards and best practices. That's a key element to make sure. If you're thinking about ISO certification, if you're thinking about quality, if you're thinking about that area, your plans need to align to standards and best practices. That's a key fundamental aspect. And as I shared now, quality and risk go hand in hand. Second, you've got to create your own intelligence network. You do that by the anonymous reporting. You do it by the background checks. You do it by the monitoring of social media. And you do that by having the ability to screen those behaviors of concern. Or you can contact us and we can do some training with you. There's a crisis coach training program, and that's where you work on a topic or an area each month as you continue to build in those types of plans. We certainly would be glad, and Blair would be glad to work with you in that way. So you could get the no-fee assessment. The New Jersey Manufacturers Association has underwritten the cost of this assessment. This is an assessment of your business continuity program or your workplace violence program, and you can have that done. It's a $2,500 assessment, and there is no cost to you or your company. That's a pretty good investment. You need to understand where you are relative to standards and best practices, and this is a good beginning point. You can do that by contacting us at Firestorm. You can give us a call, send us an email. Make sure you mention the New Jersey MEP so that there is no cost to you or your firm. Our thanks today to Joe and the New Jersey MEP. We've enjoyed the webinar series and sharing the information that we've had today. So, Joe, is there anything you want our listeners to know before we close out today?
No, not really. I think you've covered it all, Jim. I think it was very informative, and they're welcome to reach out to us as well at njmep.org if they're looking for the free assessment or additional support with respect to ISO or any of the other things we talked about today.
And if you want to reach out to Firestorm, you can go to firestorm.com. That's our website. There's a contact us form there. You can also click and view some of the previous webinars and have that information. And it's available for the training of you and your people. And again, there's no cost to view the webinars on demand. Send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can call us at 800-321-2219. We thank you for investing time with us today to learn more about learning how you know what you don't know, creating an intelligence network. There's a lot of things going on in each of our companies today. Unfortunately, the threats are not decreasing, they're increasing. So if you want to know tomorrow what's going to happen in your business, it's happening today on social media. What happens on social media today will happen in your business tomorrow. We look forward to sharing with you. We've had a number of questions that have come in. As I see, our time doesn't allow us to do so today. Blair, if you get we would appreciate if you could reach out to everyone to answer their questions. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone, and congratulations on making it to 2015. Let's make it a great year. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.